The brush trembled in my hand. May 24th, 1945. Kanoya Air Base, Kagoshima Prefecture. Outside, rain tapped against the barracks roof like impatient fingers. The faint scent of cherry blossom still lingered in the air, a cruel reminder of spring in a season that would not be mine to witness in full. The Imperial portrait watched me from the wall, His Majesty's eyes following the movement of my brush as I composed what would be my final letter home. The official one, at least. Not the words I buried in my diary beneath my sleeping mat, not the truth. I was Special Attack Force pilot Hiroshi Takahashi. 23 years old, former student of literature at Kyoto Imperial University, 13 months in the Imperial Japanese Navy Air Service, 6 weeks with the Shinpu Tokubetsu Kogeki Tai, the Divine Wind Special Attack Units, what the Americans called Kamikaze. Before the war, I read Basho and Soseki, composed mediocre poetry about autumn leaves, and dreamed of teaching literature in a small coastal town. I never imagined I would be drafted into a war already lost, trained in haste to fly an aircraft for the sole purpose of crashing it. I never imagined I would become a human bomb. The training was brief, too brief. We learned just enough to take off and navigate toward an enemy vessel. We did not waste fuel practicing landings. What would be the point? Some of the young pilots, barely 18, found this darkly humorous. "At least we cannot fail at landing," they joked, their laughter too high, too brittle. But in that abbreviated training, I learned something unexpected. I loved flying. The freedom of the air, the vast blue canvas of sky, the earth spread out below like one of the woodblock prints hanging in my childhood home. If circumstances had been different, I might have become a civilian pilot after the war, carrying passengers to peaceful destinations. Instead, I was being prepared for a one-way journey. In the official letter, my brush formed the expected characters. I will die smiling for His Imperial Majesty and our sacred homeland. I go willingly to protect our noble way of life from the American barbarians. Mother, be proud that your son will become a god, enshrined at Yasukuni with our glorious ancestors. Father, know that I fulfill my duty with unwavering spirit. The words came easily. We had heard them countless times in speeches, seen them in propaganda films, read them in the newspapers. They were not my words. Yet I wrote them because they were expected, because to write otherwise would bring shame to my family after I was gone. I folded this letter carefully, placed it in the envelope that would be delivered after my heroic sacrifice. But there was another letter, the one I never sent, the one I wrote in my mind each night as I lay on my thin mattress, listening to the breathing of the other pilots who would soon die with me. In that unsent letter, I would have written, "Mother, I am afraid. Father, I do not want to die. I do not believe my death will change the course of this war. I dream of returning to our little house, of sitting beneath the maple tree and reading as the seasons change. I dream of a wife I will never meet, children I will never hold. I do not go willingly. I go because I must, because to refuse is to be shot as a coward, because they have taken everything from us, even our right to choose how we die." That morning, our commanding officer, Captain Yamamoto, had gathered us for final instructions. His voice was hoarse from shouting, from the cigarettes he chain-smoked, from the sake he drank each night after sending another group of young men to their deaths. "Your sacrifice will turn the tide," he told us, though his eyes said otherwise. "You will be like gods striking down our enemies." Behind him on the wall hung a map showing the inexorable advance of American forces. Okinawa was nearly lost. The home islands would be next. Everyone knew it, yet no one spoke the truth aloud. To do so would be treason. After the briefing, a Shinto priest performed purification rites. We were given ceremonial cups of sake, the ritual of the 1,000 stitches. Women I had never met had sewn 1,000 red threads into a white sash I would wear tomorrow. 1 thread for each prayer. The sake burned my throat. I had never acquired a taste for it, though I pretended to enjoy it as men were expected to do. The priest tied a hachimaki headband around my forehead, white with the rising sun emblem and the inscription Shichishu Hokoku, 7 lives for my country. Some of my comrades wept openly. Not from fear, they insisted, but from the honor of being chosen. I did not weep. I felt nothing but a hollow space where my future should have been. My orders were clear. Take off at Oro 600 hours, fly southeast toward the American fleet approaching Okinawa, and aim my explosive-laden Mitsubishi A6M0 at an aircraft carrier or troop transport. My target was to be the USS Bunker Hill. I had seen photographs of it, enormous, gray, bristling with anti-aircraft guns. The intelligence officer had marked vulnerable points on a diagram. Aim for the elevator, he had instructed, as if I would have time to be selective in my final moments, as if accuracy mattered when you are yourself the bomb. That night, I took out my diary from its hiding place. This was forbidden. We were not supposed to keep personal records that might weaken our resolve. But I had been a writer before I was a pilot, and I could not stop the words that needed to escape. The cherry trees bloomed early this year, I wrote. I saw them from the air during training, a pink mist over the hills. By tomorrow, they will have shed their blossoms. I wonder if anyone will remember that I once existed, not as a weapon, but as a man who loved books and quiet mornings and the sound of rain on the roof. I wonder if Japan will remember any of us as men rather than as sacrifices. In the bunk across from mine, Toshiro was writing his own final letter. He was 18, the youngest in our group. His hands shook so badly that ink spattered the page, but his face remained stoic. Beside him, Kenji was praying, Buddhist prayer beads wrapped around his fingers. He had been a monk before the conscription. Now he would violate his vow never to take life. Further down, Satoru stared at a photograph of a young woman, his fiancée. They were to have been married last spring, before he was assigned to the Special Attack Force. He had volunteered, believing the propaganda that Japan could still win if enough of us were willing to die. I never had the heart to challenge his belief. What comfort would the truth have provided? Outside, an engine sputtered to life, mechanics testing the aircraft we would fly tomorrow. The sound made my stomach clench. I had noticed a slight vibration in my Zero during the last test flight. Nothing serious, the ground crew had assured me. But a part of me, the part I kept hidden, hoped the vibration was something more significant. A mechanical failure would be honorable. No one could blame a pilot whose aircraft never reached the target due to engine problems. Perhaps I would still die, but not as an instrument of death for others. I found myself praying to gods I no longer believed in for a seized engine, a failed fuel pump, any malfunction that would prevent me from completing my mission. Have you ever worn a mask so completely that you forgot your own face beneath it? Have you ever spoken words you did not believe so often that they began to sound like truth? Have you ever stood at the edge of your own extinction, unable to step back, unwilling to leap forward? Tell me your story in the comments. I need to know that someone understands what it means to be caught between duty and the desperate desire to live. The sack from the ceremony left a bitter taste in my mouth. I had not eaten since morning. Our final meal would be served before dawn. Special rations, rice with fish, vegetables, even a sweet bean paste dessert. A condemned man's last meal, though no one called it that. Instead, it was described as warrior's sustenance or the meal of honor. More words to disguise the reality of what we were about to do, more lies to make the unacceptable seem glorious. My family would receive compensation after my death, a pension, a certificate of honor, my name engraved at the shrine. My mother would be expected to display my photograph with pride, to tell neighbors how her son died for the emperor. My father, who had taught me to question everything but had fallen silent when the military police began arresting unpatriotic elements, would bow his head in public grief while perhaps allowing himself private doubts in the safety of his own mind. Would they ever know that I did not die believing? Would they ever suspect that their son's final thoughts were not of emperor and country, but of poetry and unwritten novels and the simple joy of breathing? The official narrative was that we volunteers were eager for death, that we competed for the honor of being selected for suicide missions. The reality was more complex. Some truly believed, young men raised on stories of samurai glory and national destiny. Others, like me, remained silent out of fear, not just for ourselves, but for our families. To refuse was to be executed as a traitor, to bring shame upon one's entire bloodline. And then there were those who simply resigned themselves to inevitability. Japan was losing the war. Death would come regardless, whether in a suicide attack, in conventional combat, or in the invasion we all knew was coming. At least this way, one's family would be honored rather than disgraced. In the diary that no one would ever read, I confessed my cowardice. I admitted that when Captain Yamamoto asked for volunteers, my hand raised itself not out of courage but out of fear. Fear of being the only one who did not volunteer, fear of the contempt in my comrades' eyes, fear of the punishment that would surely follow. In those pages, I allowed myself to be fully human, frightened, doubtful, longing for a future I would never see. In those pages, I was not Takahashi the kamikaze pilot, but simply Hiroshi who wanted to live. Tomorrow, I would don my flight suit, wrap the 1,000-stitch belt around my waist, secure the hachimaki around my forehead. I would bow to the emperor's portrait, drink one last cup of sake, and climb into the cockpit of an aircraft loaded with enough explosives to tear through the steel hull of an American warship. I would taxi down the runway, lift into the dawn sky, and fly southeast over a sea that had once connected Japan to the world, but now brought only enemies to our shores. And somewhere over that vast ocean, I would be expected to dive toward a target, to transform myself from a man into a weapon. But tonight, in these final hours of darkness, I allowed myself the luxury of truth. I did not want to die. I did not believe my death would matter in the great machinery of war. I did not think the emperor was divine, or that Japan's holy mission justified the suffering of millions. I was a man who loved literature and flying and the taste of persimmons in autumn, a man who once dreamed of teaching, of marriage, of watching the seasons change from the porch of a small house by the sea, a man whose final, most courageous act would not be dying for his country, but facing his death with the private knowledge that he had not surrendered his humanity to those who would use it as a weapon. The military propagandists claimed that cherry blossoms were the perfect symbol for kamikaze pilots, beautiful, brief, falling at the height of their splendor. The cherry trees do not weep at the loss of their blossoms, they told us. They release them willingly to the wind. But I had studied literature before the war consumed education, along with everything else. I knew that for centuries, cherry blossoms symbolized not just beauty and sacrifice, but also the impermanence of all things, mono no aware, the pathos of existence. The flowers fall not out of choice, but because it is their nature to be transient. Their beauty lies in their brevity, their inevitable surrender to gravity. The commander of all special attack forces, Admiral Onishi, once said, "In blossom today, then scattered. Life is so like a delicate flower. How can one expect the fragrance to last forever?" He meant it as inspiration for our sacrifice. I heard it as a lament for all the young lives cut short, on both sides of this conflict. The Americans in their ships, the Japanese in their planes and caves and burning cities, all of us falling before our time. My Zero fighter sits on the airfield, its silhouette visible in the moonlight through the barracks window. Tomorrow it will carry me to my death, or so they expect. But inside, in the place no commanding officer or propaganda film can reach, I hold on to a fragile hope. Perhaps the engine's vibration is more serious than the mechanics believe. Perhaps a sudden storm will force a mission abort. Perhaps the war will end before dawn. Irrational hopes, I know. But hope, like cherry blossoms, needs no justification for its existence. The official history will record that I died a hero's death, that I shouted "Banzai" as I plunged toward the enemy ship. The truth, that I whispered poetry to myself in those final moments, that I thought not of empire but of my mother's face and the books I never wrote, will die with me. Unless, by some miracle, this diary survives. Unless someone finds these words and understands that beneath the mythology of the kamikaze was a simple truth. We were human. We wanted to live. I finished the official letter with the expected flourish. May my death bring honor to my family and victory to the emperor. I seal it and place it with my personal effects to be sent home after tomorrow's mission. Then I return to my diary, to the words that will never reach their intended audience. If you are reading this, I write, know that I did not die for ideology or empire. If I must die, I die for those I love, my family who will be protected from shame by my compliance, my friends who would suffer if I refused. But more than anything, I die wishing that none of us had to die at all. The rain has stopped. The night is quiet, except for the soft breathing of sleeping pilots. Tomorrow, the sky will be blue or gray, or perhaps streaked with dawn pink. I will fly into that sky one final time. What happens after is beyond my control. But tonight, in these words that no one may ever read, I reclaim my humanity from those who would turn me into a weapon. The divine wind may carry me to my death, but my spirit remains my own. I add a final entry. I am not a god or a cherry blossom or a divine wind. I am Hiroshi Takahashi. I existed. Remember that someone lived, not just that someone died. I close the diary and hide it once more beneath my mat. In a few hours, dawn will come. The rest will be history, a history written by survivors, a history that may never know the contents of my heart. But for now, in this moment of moonlight and silence, I own my truth. It is all I have left to call mine.